Senator Carper, I should also point out that two of my sons are blue hens, so it's in the family.
Oh, that's great. They must have picked the right father and mother.
Thank you, Senator Carper. As a general proposition, anybody who gets me involved in a basketball discussion is going to generate a lot of time, so we'll have to pass on that today. Senator Portman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I want to thank you and Senator Crapo for holding this hearing. It's really important, and I want to start by just three quick thoughts about where we are in terms of Indo-Pacific trade. One is we have to recognize the importance of opening up foreign markets. That's sort of an obvious advantage of trade. Trade jobs pay about 16% more on average. 90% of consumers live outside of the United States. We need to make things in this country in order to take advantage of that, but that should be the objective. Second, I find it surprising that after passing USMCA with such an overwhelming bipartisan vote, the conclusion of a lot of people is that we should stop expanding trade at all. You know, if you look at the campaign that President Biden ran, one thing they said was, let's stop FTAs. That has always been very confusing to me. The Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, as was said earlier, does not include any new market access for U.S. exporters. I mean, I don't get that. Senator Carper just talked about that. It disappoints me because after decades and decades of debate, we finally developed what I thought was a pretty good paradigm that found consensus between industry, labor, ag, and others, and it's a template that we, should be using to move forward and improve our competitiveness. Instead, we're ceding market share to China. And Mr. Wessel acknowledged this in his testimony. We need to be engaged in the region, not just writing it off, and engaged in terms of opening up new market access. Third, when we talk about expanding trade, there's always a tendency to default to TPP. So it's either you're for trade promotion, you're for trans-Pacific partnership, or nothing. And we have to remember that wasn't very popular on a bipartisan basis. It had some flaws, including its impact on the manufacturing sector here in this country. I think what we should be doing immediately is getting Japan into the fold. Japan is by far the largest economy in the TPP group that we do not already have a trade agreement with. We have trade agreements with most of them, but not Japan. So we had to deepen the existing ties with Japan and get a trade agreement done, which requires TPA, which is another reason it's important that we sort of look beyond this notion that somehow trade is not a good thing, but rather it's something that helps our American workers. Lastly, we need to be blunt about the elephant in the room, which is China. In 2002, America was the top trading partner of these Indo-Pacific nations. We were number one. Today, it's China, by far. And Ms. Shaw, I heard your comment on that, but they are the most dominant trading partner, and that should be a wake-up call to us to embrace a new path forward, one that allows us, again, to have better market access to our products, and like USMCA, has enforceable labor and environmental rules to guard against offshoring. There are a couple of things that some of us have proposed I want to ask you about quickly that takes us down that track. One is to do something with regard to the WTO. Right now, too often agreements get stalled because one country or another objects. Often it's China. And so it works by consensus, and that means it doesn't work very well. Senator Coons and I have introduced legislation called the Trading System Preservation Act, which gives authority to USTR to pursue sector-specific trade agreements with allies which do not have an MFN or a most favored nation requirement. In other words, we should find like-minded countries that want to come up with an agreement with us and move forward with those agreements. And we should not certainly allow China to be able to free ride on the global trading system or be empowered to act as a spoiler to prevent these agreements from going forward. The government procurement agreement at the WTO will be an example of that. So let me start with you, Ms. Shaw. Do you support sector-specific plurilateral agreements without MFN that are an effective way to open markets with allies and to put pressure on China?
Thank you for the question. I do. And thank you for your leadership, along with Senator Coons, on that piece of legislation. I think countries are going to continue to negotiate with or without the WTO. So to make clear that the view from the U.S. Congress is that we should be pursuing plurilateral agreements is the right message to be sending to Geneva and our trading partners around the world. But what I would say about plurilateral and sector-specific agreements is that we shouldn't be limiting ourselves to a single sector or a single topic to discuss. We should be negotiating across a broad range of plurilaterals so that we have the opportunity to make important trades across difficult issue areas. That's how we make progress. And I realize I'm talking to a former USTR about negotiations, so definitely defer to your experience. But I don't see how we can make significant progress just taking one issue at a time. I think we need to take a coalition of the willing and go deep on a certain set of issues that really reflect the challenges we're facing today.
Yeah, I think that's a good observation, because there are trade-offs between different sectors, and our legislation wouldn't be limited just to one specific sector, but it would be this notion that we don't have to have everybody on board, because that's what's blocked progress in all kinds of things. Of environmental goods. I mean, why can't we come to put an agreement on that? Because, you know, one, or in that case, I think 2 countries object. Well, let's get the rest of us together and maybe do some trade-offs in some other areas and move forward to expand opportunities for trade and market openings. The other bill that we've been working on is called Level the Playing Field 2.0, and a number of members of this committee are co-sponsors of that legislation. Senator Brown and I are the original co-sponsors. And basically what it says is the reality is, with Belt and Road in particular and with transshipments, that China continues to game the international trading system, and we need to be responsive to that. That's the real world. So that legislation has new tools to combat some of these trade abuses. We now have 172 business trade associations and ag groups and unions that have endorsed the bill. It has a lot of support here on both sides of the aisle, including with Republicans, and it also passed the House as part of the Competes Act. Mr. Wessel, maybe you could comment on that legislation. Do you agree that Level the Playing Field Act 2.0 will help combat China's unfair trade practices and improve our economic situation in the Indo-Pacific area?
Couldn't speak more highly of both the bill that you and Senator Brown put together and your work over time, but the importance of Level the Playing Field 2.0 is a component of whatever legislation comes out of the conference on Competes and USICA. Giving workers the tools to defend their rights when they're injured by unfair foreign trade is vital. There are too many areas right now where they have no tools and they are victims. Your legislation will help put an end to that.
Great, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the time.
Very good. We're next with Senator Cardin.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me thank all of our witnesses. It's very helpful to have a former USTR on our committee, so